Hi, everyone. Welcome to March's edition of Kubernetes Meet Our Contributors. My name is Paris. I work at Google. Today, we are joined by several upstream contributors in various facets of Kubernetes. It's really awesome to have everyone here, and all of you are in, I think, even different time zones and different places, all on the North America continent, of course. But yeah, nonetheless, at least we have some good mix today. Thank you all for joining. I know everybody here has super busy schedules, but this is super important to us as it's a mentoring initiative. And we know that people learn differently and get information and consume information differently. And this is one of those ways that we can help out a mass of folks in a short 1 hour time period. So thank you so much for joining us. As always, we do have a code of conduct that we adhere to, so please be excellent to each other. I will get into a second on how to participate, but wherever you're participating, whether it's on this Zoom call as a panelist or a Twitter follower asking questions via DMs, please be respectful to each other. We all are learning together. Now, how to ask questions, the most important part of the day. I did send a tweet out earlier, and many Kubernetes folks have retweeted it. You can either ask on Twitter there, or you can ask in the Slack channel on Kubernetes that is Meet Our Contributors. And then you can also ask on the Discuss thread that we've also posted, which is discuss.kubernetes.io. So pick your communication medium poison there. And get us your questions. We'll find a way to get them, and we'll get them answered. So really quickly, next thing we wanted to do is go through some intros. And these folks will tell you a little about who they are, where they work, what they do for Kubernetes and its ecosystem, and how they got here. Carolyn, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Carolyn Van Slyke. I work at Microsoft. I just recently moved to a really cool team. It's the XDeus group. They worked on things like Helm and Draft. And the new thing I'm working on is cloud native application bundles. They call it CNAB, which is the silliest name, but whatever. And I work on the command line tool for it, which is called Porter. I used to be the chair for service catalog. I worked on that for about a year. And I also lead the Go group, Women Who Go. And so I'm really into diversity and inclusion and do a lot of community work around there. And I'm also on the Code of Conduct committee here in Kubernetes. So that's me.
Awesome. And thanks for everything, Carolyn. You do awesome work.
Thanks.
And Carolyn will also probably, I'm sure, later into the hour talk about all of the goodwill she does for new contributors as well. So thanks a ton for all your work with being welcoming to folks in the community, Carolyn. And then Mike, what's up with you?
Hi, my name is Mike Splain. I'm based out of snowy Boston. I've been working with Kubernetes for before it hit 1.0, I was experimenting with it at PayPal. And then I joined a startup and they said, what should we start with from day one? And I said, let's try this Kubernetes thing. At the time, there wasn't a great way to deploy Kubernetes. And if you've been around a long time, you've seen like, it can be hard to start from scratch with Kubernetes. And so I built it from scratch, how we ran Kubernetes. And then a project called Kops came along. And was finally ready for production code. And I think Andrew was actually contributing code to it at that time. And I was like, oh, let's switch over to this thing. And over time, I started diving in more to Kops, and I wanted to add internal load balancing to the API servers so they weren't on the public internet. And so that was like my first contribution. And I worked my way up through that. And startup life rolls and you move on. And so now I'm at Sonos, working on the Sonos cloud, moving everything over to Kubernetes and kops and all sorts of cool stuff there. I'm a member of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. I'm a kops maintainer. I also started the Boston Kubernetes meetup a bunch of years ago. Yeah, that's me. I think I also got involved with Paris when I did the mentoring program with Chris Love. He pulled me in. So that was actually how I got my reviewer status and then moved up into maintainer.
Yes, that was awesome. And Mike was a part of a beta program that we're trying to kick up to try to scale mentoring by influencing via peers and having your peers help you along through the process, all having the same goals. So thanks, Mike, for sitting through that. That was awesome. And I hear so many great things about the Boston meetup, seriously, genuinely. So that's awesome. Keep rocking up there. Andrew, what about you? What's going on?
Hey, I'm Andrew. I'm based in Toronto, Canada. I currently work for VMware. So I joined VMware in January, but before that, I was working at DigitalOcean. So I am one of the co-chairs of SIG Cloud Provider. And so how I got there was I was really interested. So when I was working at DigitalOcean, I was really interested in like cloud provider integrations and making sure that people who wanted to run Kubernetes on DigitalOcean had a really good integration story for that. And so I started a lot of work trying to add the DigitalOcean cloud provider to Kubernetes. And then I got sidetracked into the whole kind of like external cloud provider initiative. And I ended up taking a lead on that because no one else really wanted to take up that work. So that's kind of how I ended up here. But I'm also really interested in like SIG storage, SIG network efforts. And yeah, that's it for me.
Awesome. And I have a feeling we'll get a SIG cloud provider question, so I will hold off on mine as well. And that's the other thing. I did tell the panelists as well before we started that they too can ask each other questions, because mentoring isn't necessarily about mentoring someone that's junior, but it's about mentoring each other through our challenging times and fun times as well. All right. So the first question today came through DM on Slack, and this individual would like to know what's been your most challenging PR. Let's try to keep it to Kubernetes ecosystem, unless you have some really awesome story about another open source project that you want to share with us. But Kubernetes is big enough that I feel like we can all pick at least one challenging PR that we've had. And it doesn't necessarily need to be code either, just a PR in general. Go first, Carolyn.
Sure. I have one, and it's basically what got me into the Kubernetes ecosystem to begin with. And it's the worst way to get in, so I don't recommend this at all. I just started in Microsoft, and I was told basically, you are going to be a contributor to Service Catalog. And we have a command line tool, svcat, that we want to contribute to Service Catalog. And we've written some of the command line tool, and I'd been there for a month, and I'd like filled it out a lot more, and we wanted to gift it. And if you've been in open source long enough, you know that no one wants your gift of code, like a giant, like ugly wrapped in comic duct tape all over it.
Why not, Carol?
So I had tried to like match the code in their repo and show where I'm going with it, but at the same time, I hadn't wanted to just like make it totally complete, because what if they didn't want it? Then we'd wasted a ton of time. And I was being knitted to death because it wasn't finished. But at the same time, if it had been finished, they would have been mad at me for that as well. The politics of it were just so intense beyond anything I'd ever encountered in open source before. And then I was trying to navigate like the feedback, which was, do I need to listen to this person? Do I have to change every single thing based on every single piece of feedback? Or can I go, thank you for your feedback, but then not make the change? Do I have to tell them that I'm not going to make the change, or can I just quietly not do it? Like, there are so many weird etiquette, I guess, that I didn't know how to navigate. So I was constantly like talking to my manager or to other people on the team trying to figure this out. And it was really hard to go over. So I think it took like a month, and it was many meetings and things like that. And we decided never to do something like this again, not only gifting code, but to have a large PR that needed to be perfect before we could merge it. And that was a problem with the SIG. The concept was a PR had to be perfect to merge. And this inspired an idea that we've kind of done, like Aaron Schlesinger is another person who did this. He was my manager. The idea of a follow-on PR, which is as long as the PR is good enough that it's not going to hurt the code base, if it goes in, it goes in. And then we make PRs and issues that promise to fix certain things or change certain things or have those design discussions. So instead of having these arguments inside the PR, as long as the code's fine, it goes in, and then we have these arguments somewhere else, or we constantly iterate and move forward. And we do this on Project Athens. We do this in CNAB now, and it allows other people to help with that giant PR now. So instead of like one big one, I get in the skeleton for something, and then 5 other people are able to tack and like have an argument about how to do something in an issue. And then somebody else is able to contribute one thing and another and another. It means that masters may be a little more unstable, but you don't end up with a PR that takes a month or 2 or 3. We all learned a lot from that, like the SIG and a whole bunch of other people who are now maintainers in other projects.
I think that's one of the nicest things about having KEPs now, is that there's this assumption that whoever can approve that code has reviewed like the intention and is reviewing.
Can you explain what a KEP is really quick, just in case?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So a KEP is a Kubernetes enhancement proposal, which is inspired by Python's PEP. So it's this new process we have where if you want to make a significant change to Kubernetes, then you have to write a KEP, a proposal that says, what the intention of the PR, what the intention of the proposal is, the implementation details. And one of the nicest things is that there needs to be an approver from a SIG. And usually that approver also has access to approve your PRs. And so it really helps streamline some of the initiatives that people have, instead of like people just like opening these huge PRs and then, like having them reviewed over months. It usually like gets merged maybe in like a few weeks instead.
Yeah, we eventually as a SIG started doing KEPs, but we didn't even have a process to do them at the time. And yeah, I think that's something that as SIGs, it's hard to figure out, like, do we do what the main Kubernetes group does, or do we do our own thing? I don't know if other SIGs have that problem or not. I don't know if other people run into this.
Have we said what a SIG is for folks that don't know what a SIG is?
Oh yeah, sorry.
We have a lot of jargon, so that's why I'm going to flag it for all of us today.
You should. A SIG is a special interest group, and it's a group of people who sign up to say, we're interested in a problem or a set of problems and related code and questions that isn't part of core Kubernetes. So service catalog isn't in core Kubernetes. It's a set of code that goes, it's in the incubator. Nowadays, it would go inside of the Kubernetes SIGs organization. There's other ones for networking. I don't know, there's so many to list. Like, of course, my mind is blanking when you ask me to list them, but there's one for apps, contributor experience. It could be anything, really, as long as a bunch of people are willing to get together and argue on a regular basis, you can do it.
I forgot that I'm not on mute.
Yeah, but I can definitely relate to, like, especially when the cloud provider was first formed, there was a lot of unowned code that just like fell into our SIG, and none of the chairs of the SIG were like, co-founders of Kubernetes or like API reviewers or like top level owners. And so a lot of what we thought were priorities for the SIG weren't always in line with what some of the kind of like technical leads of the entire project had in mind. And so there was a lot of like, that's why like we gravitate towards KEPs, because then we can make the KEP and make sure that those people review it. But yeah, there was this like long period where there was a lot of uncertainty around like what to work on. So I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
And then, Mike, what about you from a challenging PR perspective?
I think my most challenging PR was probably either my first or my second. I feel like my first PR was probably like a docs change or something. But my second PR, where it was like actual code work on Kops specifically, if you've ever looked at how Kops works, you're talking about the complexity of running Kubernetes, but then you're also talking about running it on, in my case, AWS. And then you're talking about, the not cloud formation, but, the scripts to make the auto scaling groups work, the actual, networking components to make sure the networking works. And then it starts up, oh my gosh, now it's a whole nother world. We pull down 2 different components in order to actually get the instance starting up with our code, with the Kops code. And then we start pulling in Kubernetes core components. And there's a lot we can argue that should be cleaned up. And over time, we have a lot of work to do, especially to integrate with a lot of the work like kubeadm and a lot of stuff like that, that we want to do long term. But the first time you do one of those things, oh man, it's crazy, because if you look at the way these things work, it generally pulls from open source to do a lot of Docker containers that do this and do that on the box. And if you're just a user of Kops, for instance, it just kind of, you click it and you get an instance up in 2 or 3 minutes. Now, if that instance doesn't do what you expect it to do, now you got to figure out how to SSH into it. You got to figure out how to see what each of these components are. What is a node up? What are all these different pieces that just magically makes Kubernetes chug on Kops? And so my first one was definitely like, it wasn't even the code I was changing. It was, how do you do all of that? And how do you do it in a dev environment to make sure that whatever I'm going to contribute isn't going to break anything else, And I feel like part of it to me was also like, I had been like a lurker for so long, just like looking at GitHub issues and seeing so many people do really great things that I'm like, oh, wow, that's a great idea. I wish I could contribute something. And then I was like, why doesn't this exist? Everyone probably needs this. You don't want this public on the internet. And I dove in, and I didn't want to disappoint all those people that I had seen working on the project for so long. And I didn't want to be embarrassed for my first like real PR. But then it turned out, once the review came in, everyone was kind of like, all right, great. You missed this one thing, this test here. But besides that, let's get this into master so we can kind of get this rolling. And I would honestly just say the hardest thing for me was the first real big PR. Once you get that one in, everyone beyond that, you can kind of look back at that PR and be like, what did I miss? What could I have done better? And how could my communication been better and whatnot?
That's a really good tip. I appreciate that. All right. So second question that came from Slack, direct message. How do you seriously stay up to date with the constant changes?
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the hardest parts about Kubernetes, to be honest. Like it's always changing, and then like if you upgrade to a new version, even just like the APIs change, and you go to create an object and it's a new version of an API. And if you're not watching, you don't really know what's happening in the whole Kubernetes ecosystem. And in my role at Sonos, that's part of my job, is to like figure these things out. And one of the things that I tell people is the Kubernetes blog is amazing. I subscribe to it in Slack, so I get a notification anytime there's a new blog post. And it's great just to like, it's not going to be everything, but it's like, hey, this new thing is coming in the next version. Or I also look at the release notes for major Kubernetes versions. And read through those. And yeah, you can't get too deep on some of those things, but just being open to the changes that are coming upstream and a lot of the blog posts. And then there's things like communication and also the podcast too. The podcast has been great in the past year to like really see what new things are happening in the ecosystem and everything.
Yeah, and I think in reality that you kind of can't, like in some sense you don't, like you can't keep up with everything. And so like you hope that any breaking change is, put in the release notes and is vocalized very well, but implementation details, internal API changes, like those things, like you won't know about it until you have to deal with it yourself.
Yeah, that's kind of like the same principle of you're not going to know everything, so don't even try. You're probably not going to hear about everything, so don't even try. Carolyn, you?
I don't want to stay. Like, I know people say you can't. I'm saying I don't want to, I guess. I'm hyper aware about burnout lately. And part of burnout is thinking that you should want to stay up to date on that. So I question the question. I understand where it's coming from. And I used to want to be like that because I felt that it would somehow help me to be able to have an informed opinion about every single thing about this. But in reality, like, I have a little area of Kubernetes that is important for me to have opinions about and know about. And beyond that, being aware of things for the most part and knowing every single thing that's changing about it is not helpful and just adds to this emotional like burden. And so I'm actually happier not trying to pretend to be Superwoman, I guess. So
I
I
love
follow
that.
the things that are important to what it takes to do my job well, but I don't need to be, because my job is very low level in the like the trenches too, right? I'm not someone who needs to know Kubernetes at 50,000 feet. I need to know those API breaking changes, I guess. And for me, for that, it's being in close contact with SIGs who impact my code, you know?
I love the way you just said that. That's spot on. And I think that originally when Kubernetes first started, it was there was a lot less and there was a lot less content out there. So you kind of had to hoard it. Everything you could find, it was like, oh, all right, I need to digest this. I need to learn this. That's the only way I'm going to do this. But now there's just so much out there. So if you haven't worked on auto scaling for a while, and then, for instance, I work with a lot of users and they're like, oh, we need to learn how to use the horizontal pod auto scaler. All right, let's go find info. And so you don't need to always stay on top. The info's out there now. That's a great point.
Yep, just got to know where to find it. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, so if you do want to get like really, really high level changes that might be happening, I do recommend going to SIG architecture where they talk about like kind of the big picture changes that are happening in Kubernetes.
Plug for SIG architecture. They meet, I think, bi-weekly on Thursdays. I think their next meeting is not this Thursday, but next Thursday. And if you just Google SIG architecture Kubernetes GitHub, you'll get right to the GitHub page. So, all right. Then we have just questions rolling in at this point. So I think we are filled for the hour. But third direct message question from Slack. What do you think is a priority for the Kubernetes community to focus on right now? Obviously, all your answers might be different, and that's totally okay. And it might be even, a semi-personal response, and that's cool. So, in your opinions, what do you think is a priority for us to focus on right now?
I have two priorities. Can we have more than one priority? I'm going to say we can. I'm a very official person, and I'm going to say we can.
Yeah.
One is, I said burnout before, and I'm going to say it again. I think that we need to normalize healthy practices and give maintainers better ways to respond to things that push them towards burnout. Not just encouraging them to tell them the word self-care, but to give them, like I mentioned etiquette before, like I don't know how to respond to certain things. Now I have to spend a lot of time like going through like, what if I say this? How will they respond? Like that type of stuff is this emotional overload, like this mental overhead. Giving maintainers better ways to deal with things, and then giving them like concrete ideas for how they could organize their day and being able to say, I just do these things and here's how I can offload this type of work. And just giving them more tips and tricks in their tool bag and concrete, like I cannot stress that enough, concrete ways to handle the workload. Because I often see like two maintainers carrying the entire code base for their SIG. And you'll have 100 people in a mailing list and all these people sending in issues and expecting releases happening every 3 months, and it's 2 people doing all the reviews or something like that. And then they burn out and they get tired or they get a different day job, and then it flips to another set of people, and you get some like really eager person who's like, yeah, I can do this now. And some tired person goes, great, I'm going to put you through the meat grinder, hon. And then they hand it off to the next person, and maybe they get 6 months out of them. And then this keeps happening. And like, we need to set up something that's more sustainable. And you can't just say like, carve out time for yourself. We need something a lot more concrete. So that's really important to me. And I'm working to help give those types of resources to maintainers. And a lot of that is just like setting up ideas for how we should have interactions and where it's okay to say no and how to say no or how to delegate. And then the other thing that I think as a community that would be really interesting to look at is I'm hearing a lot from community leaders is that we've built a really interesting infrastructure with Kate's, but when it comes to end users, we don't have a platform. And I've heard a lot of calls for a SIG user experience. And it'd be really interesting to see what we could build on top of Kubernetes instead of adding more to the feature soup. I would love to see SIG UX that actually says, what can we build on top of this? And then makes, I don't know if it's a PaaS, I don't care where people take it, but I'd love to see maybe a new SIG or something that actually looks at what we can make that would make something that people could use without needing to know and stay on top of all the features of Kubernetes. That is my soapbox. Thank you.
There is a SIG creation doc inside of the Kubernetes community repo in case anyone listening would like to start up a SIG. That is a thing. Andrew can speak to that thing. I know that.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to respond to your first point, Carolyn. I can definitely relate to that because when I first became a SIG co-chair, I had this idea that being a co-chair meant, like owning all the code and like reviewing all the PRs and like getting all the commits in. But I think over time, I'm realizing more and more that being a co-chair actually means like raising mind share on like what the efforts of the SIG are and like echoing that to the community, making sure everyone is on the same page, making sure that like the KEPs that are in place can be implemented easily by new contributors and other people. And I think a lot of the SIGs are still stuck in that mentality that, oh, I'm a tech lead or co-chair of the SIG, and so my goal is to just review all the PRs. And so I think we need to, like one of the priorities should be like shifting that mentality towards like, you're not just reviewing code, but like, you're making sure that everyone is on the same page and everyone is aware of all the SIG efforts and that, everyone has the same idea for the direction of the SIG. As for SIG creation, so SIG creation, I don't know like if that changed recently, but I remember when I was making SIG Cloud Provider, it was quite a process, having to get approval from steering committee and all that. And so, that was interesting, but we can talk about that later.
All right. And then let's get back to the question. Mike, what do you think is a priority for the community to focus on right now?
That's a great question. Well, I guess it's been around for a while, but just getting more people involved, because that kind of, at the end of the day, helps everyone. To what Carolyn and Andrew were both saying is like, the more people that can help, the more people submitting PRs, the more PRs the reviewers can review. The more PRs they review, the more likely they'll move up to approver, and then they can take the load off the current approvers. And that's kind of how things have worked for a while. And, as they alluded to, a lot of times people burn out and move on or just disappear from a project, and then they pop their head back up later. And so I guess my thing would be really, for people to, don't just open an issue on something that you're experiencing. Try to figure out a solution. And if you don't know the whole solution, that's fine. Like, I think GitHub just opened up a thing the other day of draft PRs and stuff. I don't know if we've enabled it, but like, I'm always like, if you mark your PR as work in progress, I'm always happy to take a look. even if you're just like, this is nowhere close to ready, but like, let me try to help you down that path, because the more we can do on that, the less work some of us have to do in specific areas. The more people that want to contribute their ideas, the better the ecosystem will be. Yeah, I think that's where I would like to see the effort, but I know we've been working on that for as long as I think any of us have been involved.
Yeah, that the work in progress is something that we don't necessarily talk about a lot, I think, as a community. Maybe something we could bring up in contributor experience in general, just like as far as like etiquette, is concerned, and things like that. And then Andrew, did you have anything else to add to that as far as community focus?
I guess stability and extensibility. I think we're all heading towards that idea that Kubernetes is a platform for platforms, and so making sure it's stable, making sure the extension points are right, and that it's going to be set up perfectly for more platforms to be built on top of it. I think that's really important right now.
All right. Cool. All right. I'm sorry. I'm getting through my DMs here. All right. We have a question on discuss.kubernetes.io. This is actually from Edouard. Edouard just completed his outreachy internship with Kubernetes. He actually did it with contributor experience. We have a massive devel folder. What this is a bunch of developer documentation for people building upstream Kubernetes that need things like API conventions and whatnot. This is inside of the community repository. And Edward really helped us with some new structure for that, so that technical folks can help us with updating docs, so they don't need to hit the root of the folder and things like that. But Edward wants to know, while contributing, have you ever had to use the Kubernetes developer guide? And if not, when you're looking for documentation, where do you look for it?
So I don't think I've ever made an API change without having to look at the API change doc. So especially, I don't know who made it, but the API conventions and API change doc, I look at that all the time.
See, that's good feedback, because we actually don't hear that. I mean, we don't have analytics against our docs, so that's the tough part when we're trying to talk about discoverability and how docs are structured and things like that. And we just don't have that info. I mean, we've assumed that. We've made that assumption that that's a very popular doc, just based on the changes that come through and how often and things like that. But still, just hearing that from you, I think is super important. And people like Edouard, who are constantly making changes to it, need to hear that stuff too. Carolyn and Mike, what about you all? Did you use any of the docs inside of the developer guide? And what's your general sense of how things should go in there?
We just recently used the logging conventions because we were trying to switch over from having no conventions in service catalog to trying to follow Kubernetes. So we actually found that incredibly useful. It's still, sometimes we were still struggling though with it has nothing to do with the docs, unfortunately. It was there's numbers, log level 3, log level 4, log level 5. We were still struggling to figure out how to make sure that when people were using 3, 4, 5 in code, that they were using the right one. Like when we had a person submitting us a PR and we saw 3, 4, 5 in the code, we'd have to go back to that doc and reference and make sure that they were using 3, 4, 5 appropriately. And we weren't quite sure how to make sure consistently that was happening. So we keep going back to the doc, but it's still something that we struggle with, I guess. I don't know, but that's probably a code problem more than a doc problem. So we heavily use that doc, I guess, is the answer. We need it very, very badly.
And I guess I can be the bad person in the room and say that I didn't even know this existed. but it's awesome. I'm shocked that I had never heard of it. Granted, a lot of what I work on is more downstream on the cop stuff of like, hey, look, there's this feature. Let's implement it and make sure that we can use it in the cops ecosystem. But we have our own docs similar to this, and they're definitely nowhere near as well structured and detailed. So I definitely intend to look through this. And yeah, that's very cool.
And yay to Edward for the new structure. That was, we're so excited, and we hope to have even more outreachy interns and Google Summer of Code interns and folks who can like do chunks of work like this for us. That was awesome. So thank you, Edward, for that. All right, so then let's go to Carolyn's question. So Carolyn recently stepped down from a project, Service Catalog, and she can talk to us a little bit about what it's like to run out of steam and how to pick a new project within the Kubernetes ecosystem. Give us some tips. Give us some of those hot takes.
Yeah, it was hard. The 6 months. It's kind of weird because when I've like helped new people and when I came in, I was so excited to pick a project, right? You make all of these commitments, maybe just to yourself. You're like, I'm going to become a contributor. I'm going to become a maintainer. I'm going to figure out how to do releases. I'll do the releases every week. I'll help bring on new contributors. I'll answer questions. I'll be a reviewer. And then at some point, the project either doesn't get you excited anymore, or you've finished whatever it is got you excited in the first place. Like I got that CLI in, I got defaulting and all these various features I was really excited about were in, and the project stabilized, and there just wasn't as many things to do that either me or my company cared about. And I moved teams. I moved to the Helm team and I started working on different stuff. And Microsoft was like, that's cute, Carolyn, but we need you to do these other things. You can work on Service Catalog on Sundays. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe not. And then all of a sudden I had to unpack, how do I let go of all these commitments without feeling like a horrible person? Will Paris hate me? Like these were like thoughts that went through my head. And it took me months to figure out how to set all these things down, because I was like, what if the SIG dies? I'm the most active chair. I was at the time the most active person submitting PRs and doing reviews. And it's like, it made me feel personally responsible for whether or not the SIG lived or died. And that was like awful. So eventually like I got over it, but like, that's another reason why I care a lot about this topic. So I did slowly start helping redirect new contributors to new people, and got other people turned into chairs, which was really important, and got other people promoted to maintainer as quickly as possible to try to fill the gap for where I was. And I worked with Matt Farina quite a bit with SIG apps to try to take things that I had been fostering inside of my SIG and get them fostered in a different SIG, actually. One of the things I was really excited about, fit in SIG apps really well, is just as well there. So that's a CAP that got passed through with his help, and it didn't have to die just because I moved off to do something else, so which was a huge weight off my shoulders, which was great. And then I was able to step down as a chair and get someone else set up instead. And I moved on to a project that is super new. So it has a lot of runway. Cloud native application bundles, which has some command line tools, because that's where I love to live, as close to the user as possible. And some of those tools we're hoping to eventually get into, like Duffel or Porter, where we'd hope to eventually contribute to the CNCF. And they interact with things like Kubernetes and things like that. So maybe they're not like part of the ecosystem. I think of them as part of the ecosystem because they work with Kubernetes, they work with Helm, they work with all these things that my cluster. So I think of them as the same thing. And I've already started finding new contributors, building up new guides, figuring out how to make things work better, and taking all the things I learned that made it so hard to put down these commitments and trying to make sure that they aren't single person commitments to begin with. next time. So we'll see. I don't know. Talk to me again in 2 years as I start the cycle all over again. I don't know if that's helpful for anyone, but like it seems to be a cycle for people as they pick up projects and set them down again. Like you have to set them down at some point. And so it's always hard.
Yeah, I think feeling personally responsible for things as any kind of maintainer is definitely something that we all go through, and it's good to hear other people's experiences for sure, Carolyn.
Yeah.
Has anybody else had any other similar experiences where they've had to step back and kind of like what you felt and how you dealt with that and worked through it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so I changed jobs about 6 months ago from a startup. And at that point, I was running the Kubernetes meetup here in Boston, and I was getting deeply involved in COPS because it was like, well, if I'm running COPS and I need to make changes to COPS, I might as well like dive head on into COPS. And so it was a lot of COPS. And then we moved on. When I changed jobs, it was like I had to start over from scratch, like rebuild everything internally at Sonos. And it was just more like I can't manage all this stress of building a new thing, giving guidance to the rest of my team on how to build it right, since I've been around longer than any of them on this stuff. And how do I keep myself healthy, for my family? And I have a puppy that's a lot of work as well. So like, you have all these things that build, and I can definitely relate to them 100%. And I've had to step back a little bit from the meetup here in Boston, just because it takes a lot of work. I appreciate the work Paris and George and everyone does to pull these things together, because it is a lot to do anything. Even the smallest events are amazing amounts of work. And so I've just had to like back away from some of my commitments. I haven't stepped out of them, but I've had to like just dip my toe in, sometimes and stay a little bit on the outside. And then kind of come up with some new structure so that I don't get burned out. But I think there is a time where I get like this close, where you're just like, I need to go on a vacation for a month and not look at any of this stuff.
Yes. People are like, oh, I'm going to spring a meetup up. I'm just going to get a bunch of people to hang out with me. Yeah, this is so fun. And then like 3 months in, they're like, whoa, this is work.
Yeah, well, and for me specifically, I try my best to make sure, specific to the meetup, that it's not like one company coming in and selling their new Kubernetes product. And that's remarkably hard to find people that are like, you can work on a product, you can come on in and mention your product and talk about it. I'm totally cool with that. But like, I want everyone to come in and be passionate about Kubernetes and the stuff we're building, and the companies that come in and say, oh, we want to sell our new thingamabob that does this great thingamajig. And you're just like, well, no one learned anything from that unless we pay for your product, So I'm totally with you. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's a part of community building, is making sure that, your community is getting the right messaging and things along those lines. So do any of you have questions for each other?
No, I just want to say, I want to start a meetup with no speakers, because having run a couple, that's the hardest thing, is you have to do like a tap dance and like entertain someone every month or however often you're doing it. And if you could just say, I've got a space, they're giving us pizza, and the hardest thing I have to do is put on pants and show up at somebody's office like once a month, like I can handle that. And if we show up and chat and have a good time, that's cool. And if someone wants to show something, that's fine, but there's zero commitments from anyone. Like, if that doesn't make a fun meetup, then that's fine, and it naturally falls apart, but there's no commitments. I think that'd be a fun meetup. Maybe it would take some of the burnout factor out of it. Because otherwise people do. They just show up and sit in a chair and then expect you to feed them pizza and entertain them for an hour, which is not fun as an organizer.
I agree with you 100%. I kind of stopped going to the meetup in Toronto because I would go there, sit down for 2 hours, listen to talks, and then by then it's like 9 o'clock, everyone just leaves. It'd be great. Just like, I want to hear people's Kubernetes stories and I want to hear how they're using it. And I'd rather just like talk to people for like an hour or so and not just like sit down for talks. Maybe there's a good balance between the two, but meetups that just have talks and everyone leaves, like it's not for me.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, you want to meet people.
Yeah, totally. And that's actually one of the things we've tried to do. Like we were packing 3 speakers in, 35, 40 minutes each with a couple breaks and all that stuff. But yeah, we like eventually we're just like, wait a second. The best meetup we had, I think one time we had 1 speaker, and then it was just like I got up there and was like, what do you guys want to talk about? Let's shoot out some topics. And then, someone asked about networking and I was like, all right, who in the room knows about Kubernetes networking? And luckily one of the other guys was like well deep into Calico. And so like talked about how Calico works, and it's so cool when it just like organically comes together, and I agree, those are the most fun meetups, and that's some helpful feedback from me as well. So we'll try to do that here in Boston more.
Yeah, there's still a lot of curation, I think, even in the ones that seem unstructured, from an organizer perspective. I do the Bay Area Kubernetes meetup, and we always revert back to the lecture style, because from an organizer's perspective, when content's coming in, it just seems so much easier just to like book the lecture. And I mean, a lot of the times it's good content, but then it's just like, what Andrew's saying, there's no networking there at all. I will be the first one to tell you that this meetup does not have any networking or very limited networking. And then now trying to retroactively change that culture is pretty difficult. So for all of you aspiring meetup organizers out there, we encourage you to figure out how to deliver creative content to us. Anyway, all right. I think that's it for questions, though. I am looking one more time through all of the different various mediums here. And unless anybody has other questions, I'll do a wrap up. I don't see anything else. Hold on, let me one more place. And that's a no. All right. Well, we're wrapping things up. Thank you so much to George Castro. George, wave to us, come off of, yay. Thanks so much for George helping our YouTube stream stay nice and steady and make sure that people can hear us. That's a thing. And thanks again to all of the people who joined our little mentoring panel shindig circus today. Appreciate all of you and your words of wisdom. Each one of you are extremely valuable to the project, and wish you much success. All right. And that is it. We will see you next month. That is April 6th, I believe. Don't move, actually. Hold on, let me get a calendar. Am I right? April 3rd. I was wrong. Same time, 7:30 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Pacific, and we're out. See you.